my young learners of pre-kindergarten. How are you today? I hope you're faring very well. Okay, we'll continue our lesson today on the subject science skill, and the topic for today's lesson is drugs. If you may ask, what is drugs? So if you may ask, what are drugs? What do you say? Here on the board, we'll read together, okay, for a clearer understanding. It says, drugs are substances we take into our body that affect the function of their body. Can we read that together again? Drugs are substances we take into our body that affects the function of their body. Okay, now we said that drugs are what? Substances we do what? Take into our body that affects the function of our body. Okay, I have here with me, this is what? Paracetamol. It is your drug. Did you use it? Okay, when you have headache or feel pains in your body, what do you tell mommy? You tell mommy, I want to take drugs for a relief, Okay, now this is also your drugs, because this one is in liquid form and this one is in solid form. We have what? We have drugs in liquid form and in solid form. That is in tablets and in syrup. In tablets and in syrup. So now we'll go further to look at the uses of drugs. What do we use these drugs for? Can you tell me? Okay, we use it for what? To heal our sickness. To do what? To also relieve our pains. There are so many reasons why we use drugs. Let's write it down on the board. So I told you we have uses of drugs. Now, what do we use these drugs for? Okay, like I was saying, uses of drugs. Number one says to relieve our body pains. Wow. So when you feel pains, what do you take? You take what? Drugs. You take what? Drugs to relieve your pains. Drugs like what? We'll look at that. Okay, now number two says to cure sickness. To cure what? Sickness. To cure your sickness. If you know that you're running temperature, you go to mommy or daddy and tell him or her to do what? To give you drugs. And after taking that, you'll be fine. Okay, number three says to protect us from sickness or diseases. Now, what about your polio? Okay, I'm talking about your immunization. You take that to do what? To protect you from falling sick when you're old. Okay, and also prevents what? Diseases like what? Measles, so on and so forth. So it protects us from sickness or diseases. Okay, let's further look at examples of drugs. Examples of drugs. I told you we'll talk about it. So when you feel pains, what kind of drugs do you take? Okay, your paracetamol can do what? Can reduce the pains you feel. Your what? Paracetamol. Your what? Paracetamol. Okay, number two, your vitamin C. I know you like taking that orange one because it's sweet. The one that has orange color. Wow. So the white one also is good. Your vitamin C is your drugs. It also helps to do what? To cure your sickness. Okay, number three says B complex. Do you know it? Sometimes you call it BCO. Oh, it is your B complex. It is your what? Your drugs. It helps to do what? To cure your sickness. Okay, number four says cough syrup. Wow, do you know it? When you cough, so you do what? You use the cough syrup and you stop coughing. What about number five says flagyl? Do you know flagyl? Wow, when you have your stomach upset, it is your antibiotics. It will stop you from having a running stomach. It is what? Your drugs. So let's take a glance look of what we've discussed so far. We said drugs are substances we take into our body that affect the function of the body. Drugs are what? Substances we take into our body that affect the function of our body. So we can take drugs and the way our body was will not be the same again. If we were feeling sick, what will happen? We'll feel normal. Okay, that is what we mean by affects the function of our body. Now, uses of drugs. We told you earlier that it does what? It relieves our body pains. To relieve our body pains. So when you feel pains, what do you take? Is it ordinary water? No, you take drugs with water if it is the one in solid form. That is your tablet. If it is the one in liquid, you take it just like that and your pains will be relieved. So number 2 says to cure sickness. To do what? Cure sickness. I told you earlier, when you feel sick, having discomfort of your body, you do what? You take your drugs and you will feel fine. And you do what? Feel fine. So number 3 says to protect us from sickness or diseases. To do what? Protect us from sickness or diseases. So what kind of sickness? I told you for our immunization that prevents us from falling a victim of having what? Measles. Okay, now we went further to look at examples of what? Drugs. Examples of what? Drugs. Can you still remember that yourself? Paracetamol. Paracetamol. Okay, let's sing together if you can still remember the song. Paracetamol. Paracetamol. Acetamol. Cetamol. Etamol, tamol, 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 tamol. I hope you still remember that. So paracetamol is an example of drugs. Number 2 says vitamin C. Vitamin C is another example of drugs. And number 3, your B complex. Your what? B complex. Number 4, what about cough syrup? Do you know it? I said when you have cough, you should do what? Take the cough syrup of any brand, okay? What will happen? You stop coughing. And number 5 talked about what? Flagyl. Flagyl, your antibiotics for your stomach upset. Okay, now having known that, what drugs is, the uses of drugs, an example of drugs. Now, being a smart girl and a smart boy of pre-kindergarten, you're going to be smart enough to give me the answers of the questions I will ask you as your homework. So your homework is on the board. It said define the term drugs. And number 2 says write down 3 uses of drugs. 3 uses of drugs. Number 3 says mention 4 examples of drugs. Do what? Mention 4 examples of drugs. So you're going to write it in your exercise book. Do your homework. And also remember to submit it in the school for marking. So you're going to write it with your best writing and remain the same blessed child. Bye.